She's not injured, Mr. Voswick. She's grazed. It was a warning shot, for God's sake.
That's what Merla Thatchson said, while my 13-year-old son sat bleeding on our gravel path, his hoodie sleeve soaked through, and the barrel of her Glock still warm. She didn't look at him. She looked at me like I was the problem, like I was the one out of control. Merla Thatchson, chair of the Brackenwood Landing Safety and Aesthetics Council, HOA board member, self-appointed enforcer, concealed carry, no oversight, and no idea what she just triggered. She stood just 20 feet from the spot where my son had been doing balance therapy exercises, his weekly routine since the nerve injury last winter. He hadn't run, he hadn't shouted. He'd stepped backward when she entered our yard unannounced. She claimed she felt threatened by his sudden motion. Then she fired into the gravel. The round bounced. My son screamed. I didn't scream. I looked down at the blood dripping off his elbow and said, "You were facing him. I can see the impact angle from here." Her lips curled, just slightly. But she didn't deny it. That's the part she forgot, that some people don't need to guess what happened. If you've ever lived under someone who thought a badge gave them permission to carry a gun into your yard, subscribe now. Because what I did next didn't just expose her lies. It ensured the judge would deny her bail. Permanently. My name is Karen Voswick. I'm a forensic discharge analyst. For over a decade, I've trained Arizona's municipal response teams in negligent firearm discharge, angle of impact reconstruction, and ricochet behavior. I don't work in theory. I work in evidence. Merla didn't know any of that when she pulled the trigger. But she will. That deck behind my son, I built it for him. After the surgery, after the braces, after the first time he asked me if he'd ever walk without dragging his right foot. We built it from raw cedar and iron joints, small, low, and compliant with every line of the HOA's archaic bylaw manual. It wasn't just legal, it was sacred. My son was using it today like we always do, slow stretches, foot rebalancing, weight shift drills. And then Merla stormed into the yard like she'd been waiting for a chance. "You're creating subsonic vibrations that disturb the wildlife," she'd said, right before she reached for her gun. You don't expect a firearm to discharge that close to your child, and you definitely don't expect the shooter to act like you're the one being dramatic. I knelt beside Brannick, my son, checking the wound. Clean graze, outer shoulder, deep enough to break skin, not deep enough to fracture bone. The round had skipped up off something. Gravel doesn't do that, not unless there's a solid flat plane buried beneath it. And that's when I noticed it. Half buried, flush with the ground, a decorative landscaping tile, rough-edged, concrete-backed, hidden under just enough pea gravel to pass as normal, the perfect surface for a ricochet. I didn't need markers, didn't need red string or 3D software. I saw the trajectory in my head, the angle of entry, the pattern of dispersion, the rotation of the casing. She hadn't just been careless. She'd violated every civilian rule of firearm discharge. But she wouldn't be the one investigating it. I would. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I started cataloging with my eyes. Gravel scatter, burn marks, directional spread. Merla was still on her phone, probably trying to get ahead of the report. She assumed she had the board behind her. She assumed HOA privilege worked the same as legal standing. She didn't know my brother sits on the bail rotation bench for this county. She didn't know that Rendler Voswick doesn't recuse himself just because someone shares his last name. And she definitely didn't know that the footage I'd installed under the fascia board, inside the deck, recorded every second. This land was my mother's before it was mine. We kept her name on the deed even after the cancer took her. She always said the deck would be our place to rebuild. We did that. And today, Merla stepped onto it and fired a bullet toward my son. She called it a warning. The gravel was still stained when the HOA's citation arrived, folded twice and stuffed between the slats of our mailbox like a dirty napkin. Violation, Dubrau 1378, unapproved structural use and threatening behavior by minor resident. It was stamped with the Brackenwood Landing seal. Merla had filed it the same evening my son was shot. There was no mention of the gun, no mention of the blood, just a printed statement claiming that Brannick's presence on the platform had instigated a safety incident requiring measured defense. She was building her alibi with bureaucracy. I held the notice by its corner, not letting it crumple in my hand. The HOA used these like playing cards, stacking violations until a homeowner cracked. Merla was famous for it. This wasn't a defense. It was groundwork for retaliation. I walked back inside and laid the paper on the dining table beside the copy of Brannick's medical intake summary. Shallow entry, ricochet laceration, no bone impact. That had been the official readout. But it didn't list what the shot did to his nerves, his sleep, his trust in our own yard. He hadn't left the living room all morning. He sat with his legs tucked under him, hoodie pulled low, watching the deck through the window like it might turn on him. I didn't tell him about the notice. Across the street, 2 neighbors walked their terriers along the edge of the commons. One of them glanced at our house, then turned away quickly. The other just shook her head and whispered something into her collar. They'd seen it. They'd all seen it. The blast, the blood. The way Merla never checked if my son was okay. But no one had called, not one statement given, not even a knock on the door. And that told me everything. Merla had been doing this long before she pulled the trigger. My neighbor 2 doors down, Stanton, had told me once about how she fined him for a hummingbird feeder that supposedly reflected light too aggressively. Another, the Lewises, received a notice because their daughter's piano practice echoed through the vents of a shared fence. They had installed soundproof panels, out of fear, not compliance. They all kept quiet. Because Merla didn't just write tickets, she escalated. That was her pattern. Strike first, cite second, document third. Then, by the time the story got out, she had a stack of HOA proof that painted her as the responsible one. It was the same tactic used by bad beat cops and lazy security contractors. Write the narrative before someone writes it for you. But I wasn't someone, and I wasn't guessing. I had logged each of her previous citations against us, 8 in total. I had time-stamped photos of the deck's construction, the inspector's original approval form, and even a signed note from the former board president acknowledging the therapeutic use exception. Brannick wasn't unapproved. He was recovering. Our deck wasn't structural misuse. It was built to code. The only threat that ever existed here was Merla. Still, the neighborhood stayed quiet, except for one man. From the upstairs window, I saw him. Draven Cooler. He stood at the edge of his lawn, garden shears in one hand, a tablet in the other. He wasn't trimming anything. He was watching. Watching me. Watching the mailbox. And when I turned fully toward him, he flinched and looked down like he'd been caught stealing. That was new. I had seen Draven at meetings. Always quiet. Always last to vote. He was the HOA's records custodian, responsible for filing, time-stamping, storing every internal action the board took. His name was on the margin of every one of Merla's notices. He didn't create the violations, but he was the one who logged them, which meant he had access. Access to logs, access to memos, access to audit trails. I closed the blinds slowly. I didn't need to confront him yet, not now, but his face told me what I needed to know. He wasn't comfortable, not with what he saw, not with what he'd filed, maybe not with what he'd been told to do. I turned back toward the citation on the table. It was already starting to curl at the edges. The war wasn't going to be about who told the better story. It was going to be about who brought the better evidence. And I had just seen the first crack in her armor. The HOA archive room smelled like lemon oil and toner. One of those fake clean scents Merla probably insisted on. Something sterile enough to feel official, but not warm enough to welcome anyone. The room was tucked behind the clubhouse gym, converted from an old utility closet with no windows and a humming ceiling fan that clicked every 4 seconds. Draven Culler stood in front of a file cabinet, fingers frozen on the drawer, handle like he'd forgotten what he came for. "I'm just here for the structural variance forms," I said. His shoulders jerked barely. "Section F3, left cabinet." He didn't look at me when he said it, didn't turn. Just gestured toward a stack of overfilled binders leaning at a dangerous angle on the top shelf. I walked past him slowly, listening to the silence stretch between us like old wire. I opened the binder and flipped through. Diagrams, permit notes, small handwritten annotations. The one I needed was paper-clipped near the back. Deck approval, lot 12B, signed, stamped, dated, 1 year prior, fully compliant. The signature wasn't Merla's. It was the former chair, Miles Argett, who'd stepped down last fall after a mild stroke, before Merla took over and weaponized the bylaws. I glanced sideways. Draven hadn't moved. "You filed the citations on my deck?" I asked. His jaw tensed. He nodded once. "Policy says all notices go through my office before mailing. My job is just time-stamping and archiving. You know the deck was already approved. Another nod, slower this time. I didn't push. Instead, I closed the binder, tucked it under my arm, and stepped back. Did the board vote on the patrol policy? This time, he did look at me. His eyes flicked up, met mine for a second too long. No, he said. That was it. One syllable, quiet. But it landed heavy. Because now it was on record, just between us, for the first time. Merla's so-called safety patrol had no board authorization. That meant no liability coverage, no governing oversight, no neighborhood approval. Just Merla, her handgun, and her paranoia. Draven turned back to the cabinet and opened it slowly. He pulled out a folder labeled Q4 Ordinances and stared at it like he'd never seen it before. I don't sign off on patrol changes, he said, barely above a whisper. I just log the memos she submits. But the patrols aren't in the logs, are they? He hesitated. Only in the draft queue. Unratified. His fingers tightened around the folder. She said they'd be reviewed after implementation. That was Merla's tactic. Do first, file later, and bluff the process into catching up. She counted on silence, on fear, on people like Draven who weren't bad, just tired. People who didn't want to be the first one to speak out. Can I see the drafts? I asked. He shook his head, more regret than refusal. They're only accessible with board-level clearance. I'm not allowed to share them. Not even with a bleeding child. Not even after a firearm had been discharged on HOA grounds. That was the world she built, one where policy mattered more than people. I nodded once, turned, and walked toward the door. Just before I reached it, he spoke again. She keeps the original drafts on a private tablet, he said. Board Sync only logs the version she uploads after redactions. I paused. She updates the metadata manually before submitting it to the HOA cloud. It's inconsistent. That last word lingered in the air. Not an accusation, a breadcrumb. I stepped out into the hallway, binder under my arm, head down. But my pulse had shifted. Draven wasn't just conflicted. He was teetering. One more push, one more crack in her polished shield, and he'd give me what I needed. He didn't want to be part of this. He didn't want his name on the history Merla was writing. And now, for the first time, I wasn't the only one carrying a file that could bury her. 2 days later, another notice appeared, this one duct taped to our gate instead of mailed. Merla always escalated when she felt pressure, and I definitely applied some. Emergency safety mandate, it read across the top, bolded in red. According to her statement, Brannick's use of the deck had violated quiet hour regulations, created hazardous ground vibration, and triggered an acute response protocol under HOA subsection 9D. There is no subsection 9D, it was entirely fabricated. But it didn't matter, it looked official. It had the HOA seal, her signature, and a scanned timestamp that would pass as legitimate to anyone who hadn't read the bylaws in full, which most residents hadn't. That was her shield, complexity as a weapon. I peeled the paper from the gate slowly, folding it in half, then half again. Across the street, Stanton was watering his azaleas. His eyes flicked toward me, then back to the flowers. No one wanted to get involved. The HOA group chat lit up 30 minutes later. Someone, probably Merla, posted a formal update under the name BL Safety and Aesthetics Council. The message warned residents that unauthorized elevated structures may cause seismic disturbance to nearby wildlife bedding zones, and reminded everyone that safety response authority lies with the council in times of visual or behavioral escalation. Behavioral escalation. As if my son's presence on our own deck was a threat to local fauna. I scrolled past the comments, none from Merla directly, but plenty of suspicious accounts chiming in. We support the council's decision. It's not about punishment, it's about peace. One of them even mentioned good parenting starts with understanding boundaries. A jab disguised as concern. She wasn't just controlling the narrative now. She was trying to bury mine under a pile of faint praise and hollow compliance. But something caught my eye. A comment from a real name. R. Kohler. No vote was held on patrol escalation. Recommend full meeting review. It was buried under 4 generic replies, but it was there. Draven had spoken, not loud, not boldly, but publicly. He'd broken ranks. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That one comment was enough to create a thread. Others would see it, some would scroll, but a few might remember their own quiet grievances. The feeder, the piano, the fines, the fear. Merla would notice too. That evening, someone knocked at my door. It wasn't Merla. It was Paulina Mears, another HOA board member, though lower profile. She didn't carry weight like Merla, didn't seem to want to. She stood on the porch with a clipboard and a strained smile. "Hi, Mr. Voswick. Just conducting a wellness check on behalf of the board." I didn't step aside. "You mean Merla?" She hesitated. "We're just hoping things de-escalate. There's been a lot of discussion, and the community hasn't asked a single time how my son is doing." That stopped her. For a moment, the mask slipped. Her eyes dropped. "I'm sorry about what happened." "Are you sorry it happened, or sorry people are talking about it?" She didn't answer that. She handed me a manila envelope and nodded once. "Just wanted to deliver this in person." Inside was a list of proposed amendments to the bylaws, most of them irrelevant, but one stood out. A proposed retroactive clause allowing the chairperson of safety and aesthetics to initiate emergency policy without a vote, provided it's later reviewed. A built-in alibi. She was trying to patch the hole after the fact, to make her gun, her patrol, her presence on my lawn, all look like protocol. But timing is evidence. Sequence matters. And I already had a time-stamped copy of the existing bylaws, unedited, downloaded a week ago. She couldn't rewrite time. Not this time. I went back inside and placed the envelope on the table beside the original violation notice and the binder from the archive room. The pile was growing. Citations, contradictions, fabricated codes, manufactured authority. But her mistake wasn't in what she wrote. It was in what she assumed no one else would notice. And now, her own people were blinking. The sky was pale gray when I stepped into the yard, that muted kind of morning light where everything looks colder than it is. I brought my tools with me, a ground grid plate, a forensic angle rod, my trajectory flags, and the GoPro I used for training workshops. I didn't tell anyone I was doing this. I didn't need permission. The only person who needed to see what happened was me. Brannick stayed inside, curled up in a blanket on the couch. He hadn't touched the deck since it happened. I crouched where the blood had landed first, just beside the lower edge of the platform. The gravel had shifted since that day, disturbed by footsteps, cleanup, rain, but underneath, the pattern was still there. I pushed aside the stones and found it. Flat slate embedded at an angle under the soil line. Decorative, likely left over from before we bought the house. One edge had a fresh chip. I placed the grid plate over the impact site and set the rod at a 20-degree tilt from where Merla had stood. The path was clean. Too clean. That wasn't random scatter. That was linear displacement. Then I followed the line upward, past the bushes, through the air, until it pointed straight to where Brannick had been standing. Shoulder height, right side. The flags fluttered slightly in the breeze as I placed them. One at the origin, one at the impact tile, and one final at the height of Brannick's wound. The triangulation was undeniable, a textbook ricochet. Which meant this wasn't a fluke, it was physics. I turned on the GoPro and narrated every step, what tools I used, where the impact sat, what I'd uncovered. I didn't speculate. I documented, slowly, methodically, the way I'd taught others to do it for years. Then I opened my case logbook, every page cataloged, incident date, weapon involved, spatial mapping. I'd brought it because I wanted to mark this one the same way I had all the others, and because I wanted this to exist somewhere beyond memory. Merla fired a weapon on private property, at a minor, in response to a non-threatening movement, and the evidence said so. When I walked back inside, Brannick was still on the couch, eyes half closed under the blanket. "You were right," I said, placing the rod down beside my laptop. She aimed down, but she stood too close. He didn't respond right away, then, quietly, "Is she going to get away with it?" "No," I said. "Not this time." I uploaded the footage, high resolution, time-stamped, filed under Ricochet, Chas Incident 001. It was the first time I'd ever built a forensic case against someone I lived near, against someone who thought an HOA badge made her judge and executioner. I didn't send it anywhere yet, not to the board, not to the police, not to the HOA, because this wasn't for them, not yet. First, I had to be sure what it meant legally, not just scientifically. I wasn't going to make the mistake of shouting into a void. I needed someone who understood the court side of the process. I opened my messages and drafted a text. You're still assigned bail rotation this quarter, right? Something's coming. You'll want to see it first. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. Rendler knew my tone. We'd grown up balancing each other. He'd gone courtroom, I'd gone field. Same fight, different weapons. 10 minutes later, he called. I let it ring once before picking up. You need to bring it to me directly, he said, if it's what you're implying. It's worse, I replied. It involves a child. It involves premeditated overreach. And it happened under color of authority. He was silent for a moment. You have the proof? I am the proof. When I ended the call, I stared at the deck outside the window for a long time. The wood was still damp from the morning dew, but the blood had been washed away. You couldn't see what happened anymore, not unless you knew where to look, not unless you understood the weight of angle, distance, and intent. But I knew. And now, so did my brother. The sheriff's cruiser parked at the end of the cul-de-sac just before dusk. Tires, crunching slow over gravel. It didn't come with sirens or urgency, just quiet authority. Brannick watched from the upstairs window, barely peeking past the curtain. I stayed on the porch. I wasn't hiding, not anymore. Deputy Callan stepped out, notepad in one hand, body cam already blinking red. We're following up on a discharge report filed earlier this week, he said. There's a minor listed as injured. I handed him the folder. Inside, printouts of my trajectory analysis, GoPro footage stills, measurement photos, timestamps, and a signed statement outlining the angle of discharge. It wasn't emotional, it was evidence. Callan flipped through the first few pages, brow tightening. You compiled this yourself? I'm a forensic discharge analyst, I said. I've trained officers from Pinal, Maricopa, and Coconino counties. I don't guess when it comes to impact physics. He looked up at me with new eyes, professional now, not just procedural. You're saying this wasn't an accident. I'm saying the bullet was fired with enough proximity, direction, and force to qualify as reckless endangerment under Arizona Statute 13 to 1201. And it struck a child. He nodded, slow, then asked to see the site. We walked to the deck. I pointed out the gravel tile, the chipped corner, the rod placement still marked faintly with chalk. He followed the line of sight, running his eyes from origin to trajectory, his jaw tightening as the physics settled in. He didn't need to say anything. I could tell he understood. What's her relationship to you? She's not family, I said. She's not a friend. She's an HOA official acting outside the board's authority. He made a note. Has there been any contact since? She filed a retroactive policy to justify her armed presence, I said. It's unsigned and not approved by any board vote. He looked back at the house. Your son? How's he doing? He hasn't stepped on the deck since it happened. Callan didn't speak for a moment. Then he clipped his notepad shut. We'll need to elevate this. I'll file the preliminary, but it'll go through the county attorney for review. There'll be an interview, maybe a statement. We'll also need to look at the HOA's records. You'll want to speak with Draven Culler, I said. He's the records custodian. He hasn't come forward formally, but he knows she's been operating outside protocol. Callan gave a nod that felt like more than agreement. It felt like commitment. When he left, I stayed outside for a while. The sky had shifted. Thin bands of orange cut through gray clouds like wounds that refused to close. I watched as the cruiser turned the corner, brake lights flickering once before vanishing. Inside, Brannick had curled up on the couch again. His sketchbook was open, the pencil gripped loosely in his hand. The drawing was half finished, a slope of our deck, the outline of the trees, a bird in mid-flight near the corner. But in the bottom corner, he'd drawn the tile, the chipped stone, the one we'd uncovered together. Looks just like it, I said quietly. He didn't look up. It's the part I remember the most. Later that night, my phone buzzed. Rendler, I answered on the second ring. I reviewed the footage and the report, he said, skipping pleasantries. You're right about the statute, and the injury qualifies as dangerous offense under 133961 subsection A. So she's eligible for no bail? If the charges align and the judge finds sufficient cause, yes. She's not protected by HOA immunity. She was acting independently. Are you going to hear the case? I'm on the rotation, he said. Unless she files for reassignment, I'm the one who gets her bail hearing. I breathed out slowly. She doesn't know you're my brother. She'll figure it out. And you? I won't recuse. I don't have to. It's a bail hearing, not trial. I can remain impartial. That was all I needed. Not interference, just presence. Merla thought she understood the rules. She thought citations and policy drafts could shield her from consequence. But the law wasn't paper. It was after 9 when I heard the knock. Not the confident kind Merla used. No sharp rhythm, no impatience. This was hesitant, measured. I opened the door, expecting silence. Maybe a notice folded and run. Instead, Draven Culler stood there with a tablet clutched to his chest like a shield. He didn't wait for an invitation. I need to talk, he said, already stepping past me. I closed the door behind him. He stopped in the entryway, eyes scanning the living room like he expected a trap. His tie was crooked, shirt untucked, face pale. He looked like someone who'd spent too long carrying secrets. I can't be part of it anymore, he said. Not after what she did to your boy. I waited. No prompting, just silence. He held out the tablet. Everything's on here. The patrol drafts, the raw logs. Every time she edited a timestamp before submitting to the HOA cloud. I took it, waking the screen with a swipe. Files lined the interface. Drafts marked V1 unreviewed, V2 temp, and final redacted. Notes in the margins, language manipulation. One version even had a clause claiming a child on a deck could reasonably be misidentified as a wildlife threat. Draven sat down on the edge of the ottoman, staring at the floor. She told us it would be reviewed retroactively, that the legal team would smooth it over, but there is no legal team, it's just her. You knew she didn't have authority to patrol, he nodded. I knew. I also knew she filed fake vote records, no signatures, just my name in the log. She used my access codes to backdate the approval files. You didn't change them? No, but I didn't stop her, either. That was the weight he carried, not just guilt. Complicity by silence. She used to be different, he said quietly. After Miles stepped down, she promised to clean things up, said she'd make Brackenwood safer. But she started turning safety into leverage. I opened one of the patrol logs. The language was chilling. Visual escalation protocols, pattern threat modeling, youth movement disruption countermeasures. She'd written it like a military manual. This one, I said, turning the tablet toward him. She used this to justify being armed? He swallowed. She filed it 2 weeks after the first incident with your son, when you refused to remove the deck. That's when she started writing about visual threats. None of it had been spontaneous. The warning shot wasn't fear, it was escalation. Draven rubbed his face with both hands. I've kept backups of everything, local and cloud. Even if she wipes her end, I've got full version history. I met his eyes. Why now? He didn't answer right away. Then, because I saw your son bleed, and I saw her not care. He stood, nerves raw but steady. You'll need to take this to the sheriff's office. It's better coming from you. You have standing now. I nodded once. Will you testify? He hesitated. Then, yes. There it was. The line crossed. The first real crack in her fortress turned breach. As he moved to leave, I stopped him. Draven, this might not be safe. Once this hits, she'll know it came from inside. He turned at the door, and for the first time, I saw a flash of something solid behind his tired eyes. Let her come for me. I'm done hiding behind her paperwork. When the door shut behind him, I turned the tablet in my hands like a verdict. Every file, every log, every edit. Each one a nail in the illusion Merla had built around herself. Authority without law, power without process. Now, that shield was broken. She wouldn't see it coming from me. She'd feel it when her own record stood against her. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't try. By sunrise, my kitchen table looked like an evidence board. The original deck approval, the fabricated violation notices, screenshots from the HOA portal, Draven's raw patrol logs. My own trajectory recon footage paused mid-frame, flag markers floating like silent witnesses to a shot that should have never happened. I hadn't felt this precise in years. For most of my career, I built cases for other people, other children, other families. I diagrammed stray bullets through drywall. I reconstructed fatal misfires in grocery store parking lots. But this time, it was my deck, my kid. My blood dried into the grain of the boards I sealed myself. And that made everything sharper. The file I was building needed to do more than accuse. It had to compel. I started with the discharge evidence. I split the video footage into 2 formats. One clean, uninterrupted reel with my narration, and another with side-by-side overlays, angle grid, audio timestamp, and motion path render. Then I pulled the injury documentation, Brannick's intake form, his physician's notes, and the post-incident therapy referral for trauma counseling. I paired it with the GoPro stills of the gravel tile and the impact point. Then I added Draven's contribution, his full folder dump. His files showed everything Merla had touched, backdated, or fabricated. One draft alone proved she added visual escalation clause, a full 36 hours after the incident, then re-uploaded the policy under a backdated tag using Draven's credentials. I captured the screen recording of the version history. I saved it in 3 formats, printed hard copies, backed it to 2 separate encrypted USBs. The next piece was legal. I pulled the state statute from the Arizona Criminal Code. ARS, paragraph 13, 1201, endangerment, subsection A, recklessly endangering another person with a substantial risk of imminent death or physical injury. Subsection B, class 6 felony if committed with a deadly weapon. And next to that, ARS, paragraph 13, 3961, offense is not bailable. Paragraph A3. If the person is charged with a felony offense and there is clear and convincing evidence that the person poses a substantial danger to any other person or the community. She qualified for both. By 8:00 a.m., I had every exhibit labeled, every piece of data time aligned, a 3-ring binder for print, a USB for digital, and a sealed envelope addressed to Rendler, not to sway him, but to ensure protocol, no surprises, no blind submissions. At 9:12, I received a text. Packet received, reviewing today. You did this right, Cal. Exactly the way it needed to be done. I stood in the doorway for a long time after that, staring at the deck. A hummingbird hovered near the edge, the same corner where Brannick usually started his exercises, back when he still believed this place was his. We built that deck for healing. She'd turned it into a crime scene. Not anymore. I left the house at 10 sharp and drove into town. The sheriff's office sat low against the road, brick-faced and quiet. Inside, Deputy Callan met me in the hallway and ushered me into a room with soft chairs and a heavy recording mic. He didn't speak as I laid the binder in front of him, just opened it and began flipping. 30 pages in, he leaned back and let out a slow breath. "You're not just reporting this," he said. "You're prosecuting it. She came onto my property. She fired a round toward my son. Then she tried to bury it under paperwork. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern." He nodded. "We'll move fast. Her arrest is already on the docket. Now we have grounds to recommend denial of bail." I handed him the USB. "There's more on there. Logs, video, version history from her HOA edits. Draven's ready to give a statement when called." Callan tucked it into an evidence pouch and sealed it. "We'll get this to the county attorney, but I'll be honest, this is the cleanest package I've ever seen. She's not walking out of this one. No headlines, no drama, just a cold procedural weight settling into motion. The arrest happened faster than I expected. No warning, no press, no HOA chatter buzzing in the background. Just a quiet ripple through the neighborhood that morning as a county cruiser turned the corner into Brackenwood Landing and rolled to a stop in front of Merla Thatchson's home. I stood at my upstairs window, watching through the slats. It was a strange thing to see her porch, so often her platform for threats and lectures, become the backdrop for silence. The officer stepped out, checked his clipboard, then rang the bell. No shouting, no sirens. Just the slow disintegration of a woman's false authority. Merla answered in her usual athletic jacket, clipboard in hand like she still had meetings to run. Her expression didn't change as the cuffs went on. Her back stayed straight, but I caught the flick of her eyes toward the cul-de-sac, toward me. She knew. By the time the car pulled away, the neighborhood group chat was already alight. "Does anyone know what happened? Why was Merla being escorted? I heard something about an altercation, but surely not her." I didn't reply, neither did Draven, but Stanton posted a single sentence. "Should have happened sooner." Later that afternoon, I received the formal notice. Merla Thatchson, charged with endangerment, reckless discharge of a firearm, and aggravated assault involving a minor. Bail hearing scheduled within 48 hours. Rendler would be presiding. That night, I finalized the last steps of my prep, steps I'd never needed to take in all my years behind a lab table. I scanned every single violation Merla had filed against us, and cross-referenced them against the HOA timestamps. Nearly a third were entered without corroborating vote records. I logged inconsistencies, backdated language, and edits submitted within hours of disciplinary action. It was a trail of falsification masked as administrative diligence. Then I backed everything up. 3 separate drives, 1 encrypted, 1 locked in a fireproof case, 1 already submitted to the sheriff's office. If Merla had anyone left on the board loyal enough to try and sweep this up before it hit courtroom air, they'd have nothing to destroy. At 7:53 p.m., I received another text. Draven Kohler. Just got the call. I'm being subpoenaed. I'm testifying at the hearing. You okay with that? I don't want to overstep. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. You're not overstepping. You're correcting the record, the one she tried to write in our names. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The next morning, I met with Deputy Callan one last time. He wanted to walk me through the courtroom logistics, chain of custody, exhibits, accepted evidentiary flow. I handed him a final summary of my reconstruction, bullet path trajectory, ricochet model, impact angles, all signed and sealed. Calran, he said, tapping the edge of the folder, you ever consider working with prosecution? I work with physics, I said. The courtroom just catches up later. He smirked, and that was the end of it. At home, I found Brannick on the porch, not on the deck, just near it, close enough to glance at it without flinching. He sat with a sketchbook again, legs tucked under, pencil tapping against the page. She's not coming back, is she? He asked. No, I said. She won't be near this place again, not with what she's done, not with what we've proven. He didn't look up. You sure? I'm testifying. Draven's testifying, and your uncle is overseeing the hearing. She won't walk through this like she walked through our yard. He nodded, slow and quiet, as if he hadn't needed the words, just the certainty in my voice. Inside, I laid out my courtroom folder next to the original cedar board I had pulled from the deck last week, the one with the stain from Brannick's blood, sealed and shellacked, preserved in case she tried to claim none of it happened. She'd built her reign out of fear and loopholes, but I'd built this case from blood, angle, statute, and truth. The bail hearing was scheduled for names at a.m., but I arrived by 7:30. Not out of nervousness, out of habit. In my world, preparation wasn't optional. It was a matter of control, of anchoring what others might try to spin. The courthouse lobby was quiet, just the low murmur of clerks behind glass and the rustle of paper. I took a seat outside courtroom C2 and set the binder on my lap. Draven arrived 20 minutes later. No tie. Just a button down, sleeves rolled to the elbow, palm slightly damp as he gripped his own folder of documents like it might disappear if he blinked. She's going to look right at me, he muttered. She'll try, I said. Don't give her anything back. He didn't nod, but he stayed seated. That was enough. The courtroom doors opened promptly at 9. Inside, everything was cold symmetry, polished wood, neutral tones, the judge's chair elevated just enough to remind everyone who the room belonged to. Rendler entered from the side, robes flowing, expression unreadable. He didn't look at me. Good. Merla sat at the defense table, flanked by an attorney I didn't recognize. Young, too polished, probably HOA funded. She wore a navy blazer over her usual athletic gear, trying to present as formal, professional, controlled. But I watched her fingers. They twitched against the table edge every time someone coughed, shifted, breathed. The prosecutor stood first. She laid out the charges clearly. 1 count of reckless endangerment with a firearm, 1 count of aggravated assault on a minor, 1 count of discharge within a residential zone. Then she gestured toward the binder in front of her. We are submitting forensic evidence provided by the victim's father, a certified discharge analyst with over a decade of service in state-level training programs. This includes trajectory modeling, injury corroboration, and impact evidence supported by photographic and physical exhibits. She paused. We are also submitting digital logs and version histories of the defendant's actions within the Brackenwood HOA system, provided by the HOA records custodian, who will testify today to a pattern of falsified authority and post-incident policy manipulation. Draven exhaled slowly beside me. The defense rose. Her attorney argued that the incident was unfortunate but not malicious, that Merla had a legal permit for the weapon, that the child's presence on an elevated platform without railings could reasonably trigger a startled reaction from any safety-minded official. He used the phrase reasonable fear 3 times in less than a minute. Then Rendler spoke, voice calm and exact. Ms. Thatchson, you are currently facing felony charges involving a minor. Given the nature of the accusations and the evidence submitted, I will be evaluating whether pretrial release is appropriate under Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 133961. She tried to speak then. Her lawyer leaned in to stop her, but too late. I didn't mean to hit him, she said. It was just, he moved so suddenly. Her voice cracked slightly. Your Honor, I have years of service on the board. The boy was startled. It was an accident. I was protecting the community. Rendler's gaze didn't shift. You discharged a firearm toward a child standing on private property. Your own logs show that you established unauthorized patrol protocols without board approval, submitted edited policy drafts after the fact, and entered properties under false authority. That's not protection, that's escalation. He turned toward the bailiff. Is the minor still under medical care? The prosecutor nodded. He is undergoing trauma-related therapy and follow-up for a nerve-related shoulder injury. Has the victim or their family reported retaliation? Not directly, Your Honor, but HOA citations continued post-incident and included fabricated language. Rendler paused for just a beat. Given the evidence presented, the nature of the offense, and the potential threat to community safety, I find that the defendant poses a substantial danger to others and is therefore ineligible for bail pending trial. Silence. Then movement. The bailiff stepped forward. Merla's face didn't fall apart. It didn't crumble, but I saw the flicker behind her eyes. The place where certainty used to live. Gone. Draven leaned back in his chair and let out a breath I don't think he knew he'd been holding. I didn't move. There was no celebration, just confirmation. The community meeting wasn't called by the HOA board. It was called by the homeowners. A petition circulated the night after Merla was denied bail. 73 signatures, just enough to require a quorum under Brackenwood's own charter. They held it in the community courtyard, under the faded pergola Merla once fined a resident for decorating with fairy lights. This time, no decorations, just folding chairs, clipboards, people who had kept quiet for too long. I stood near the back, didn't need a podium. My part was mostly done now. This was for them. Draven arrived 5 minutes before it started, shoulders squared, nerves visible but held. Paulina Mears sat at the folding table up front, flanked by the 2 remaining board members who hadn't spoken since the arrest. She cleared her throat. We're here today to discuss the events surrounding Merla Thatchson, her suspension from the HOA board, and the subsequent charges brought against her. This is not a hearing. This is a reset. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Stanton stood. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the quiet. She fined me $300 because my grandson rode a scooter on our shared sidewalk. Said the vibrations could crack the retaining wall. A low murmur followed. Another voice chimed in, Monica Liu from Lot 5. She told me to move my bird bath because it disrupted visual harmony. Then mailed me 2 citations when I didn't respond within 48 hours. More murmurs, more heads nodding. Then Paulina gestured toward Draven. Mr. Kohler, you have the floor. He stood, tablet in hand, throat dry. I've been the records custodian for the past 2 years, he began. And during that time, I logged every citation, every policy draft, every violation. I followed protocol because I believed the board was acting within its charter. He paused. That changed when Merla began submitting safety memos without votes. She altered version histories, backdated drafts, and filed citations under emergency authority that never existed. I have the logs. I've given them to law enforcement, and I've testified under oath. The crowd went still. I let it happen longer than I should have, he added. But I'm not going to let it happen again. Paulina nodded. Thank you, Mr. Kohler. From the back, I watched hands raise. One by one, residents stood and told their stories. Not dramatic, not theatrical. Just ordinary people recounting extraordinary overreach. Flower pots cited for color imbalance. Children scolded for chalk drawings. Warning notices delivered at night. Brackenwood wasn't a neighborhood anymore. It had become a fear grid. Anne Merla had drawn the map. When Paulina called for new business, Stanton raised his hand again. I'd like to motion for a full recall vote on all remaining board members who approved Merla's unsanctioned policy drafts or failed to speak against them. A ripple ran through the chairs. The treasurer stood and walked, out without a word. Another board member followed. Paulina didn't flinch. Motion received. Vote to be held next Friday. Nominations open immediately. People clapped, not out of celebration, but relief, like air was finally returning to the room. Someone turned to me. "You gonna run?" I shook my head. "I'm not here to govern, I'm here to rebuild." They didn't press. On my way out, I passed the garden that Merla once proposed tearing out for low-maintenance concrete harmony. Wildflowers grew through the bricks now, untrimmed, untidy, defiantly alive. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded note. Brannick's handwriting. Thanks for not letting her rewrite it. Underneath, a rough pencil sketch of the deck. And in the corner, the little stone tile, the one that changed everything. I didn't need a podium. The truth had already taken the floor. The day after the vote, Brackenwood felt different. No banners, no announcements, just the absence of something heavy. Like the pressure that had lived in the air for so long had finally let go. The recall passed with 89% approval. Paulina Mears stayed on as interim chair. Draven was officially named board secretary. 2 new residents were voted in, quiet names, honest people. Not one of them had ever filed a citation in their lives. I stood at the edge of my deck that morning, the sun cutting clean lines across the cedar boards. Brannick sat beside me, one leg bent, sketchbook in his lap. His hood was down, his sleeve pushed up. The scar had faded, but it was still there. A thin, pale reminder. "You think she'll ever come back?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not to Brackenwood, not with the charges, not after what we showed them." He nodded, pencil moving again. "Uncle Rendler said it'll go to trial?" "It will," I replied. "But she won't walk into that room as a board member. She'll walk in as a defendant." Brannick smirked without lifting his head. "Bet she won't be writing many citations from there." I laughed once, low in my chest. Behind us, the deck felt solid again. No longer haunted by that moment. No longer just the site of an injury. It had become what it was always meant to be, a space for him to reclaim, for us to rebuild. Later that afternoon, I walked to the edge of the garden, the one Merla hated. Stanton was planting a second row of violets, his knees coated in soil. He looked up. "Never thought I'd see this place peaceful again." "It's not peaceful," I said. "It's just not scared." He nodded slowly. "That's enough." Back home, I opened the case that held the original binder. Inside, I'd added one more item. The cedar plank from the day of the shooting. Shellacked, sealed, and signed in permanent ink. Not as a trophy, as testimony. I don't know what Merla will argue at trial. Maybe she'll say she was afraid. Maybe she'll say she meant well, but her intentions didn't matter. What mattered was where the bullet landed. What mattered was what Brannick remembers every time he steps outside. What mattered is what we proved. And now, for the first time in a long time, people in this neighborhood speak freely again. They walk dogs without fear of citations. They decorate porches. They talk about plans. I didn't set out to be a voice for this community. I just wanted my son to be able to use the deck we built together, without bleeding for it. But sometimes, standing your ground doesn't just protect your own. Sometimes it resets the whole place. If you've ever been targeted by a person who used rules to control you, if you've ever been told to stay quiet because that's just how things work, subscribe now. Because next time someone like Merla tries it, you'll already know what to do.